Hey everyone, I'm Meghna,
I'm Sahana.
and this is our co-host and co-producer Shankri.
Today we're going to be talking about The Purchased Bride by Peter Constantine. The Purchased Bride, like its title implies, follows the story of a young girl, Maria, who lives in a small Greek village during the time period of the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Maria's village is pillaged by insurgents. After this, she and her family have to flee to a refugee camp, and her only option to help save and support her family is to be sold to a much older, wealthy Turkish man. The story follows her trials and tribulations and reflects on the social structures and historical situation of the time period. The story is also based off of the author Peter Constantine's own grandmother.
I thought honestly that was pretty crazy to know. When me and Sahana first came across this book, it was at the Living Tamil Lit Fest, where we actually met the author first, and he spoke about this book and how his family history was entwined in it.
Right, and it just so, if I wasn't specific enough, to give you a clear idea of the age gap in this book, Maria is 15 when she's going through all of these struggles, and the person she's being sold to is in his 60s, which is really crazy to read about and think about. But something I was saying at the time was the trials she goes through during the book, like her having to flee to the refugee camp, being threatened with sexual violence, physical violence, disease, like all of these different threats. As you follow her throughout the course of the book, by the end of the book, you're low-key like, yeah, oh my gosh, thank God she was sold to this man. Like, that's the safest place for her to be, which is a kind of crazy thing to think about. But I think it also just speaks to how much Constantine is able to entrench you into the settings of the book, make you really empathize with the struggles that Maria is going through and why she feels like this is the only solution.
I think, yeah, we were definitely talking about this earlier. Something that I pointed out was extremely unique about this book in particular is that the normalcy of it all, the normalcy of sexual violence, of physical assault, of how women are treated in a family. Sahana and I were talking about sort of family dynamics now compared to then, how we define love, and if that bond between mother, child, father, child, the stuff that's being talked about in this book, is it even equivalent to the stuff that we're feeling today? And something that came up is that the parents in this book, her mother and father, don't really see Maria as Maria, they see her as a daughter, similarly to how they see their sons as sons, not their individual personalities.
Right. So a lot of these family connections are built on less of what we would construe as love and more like obligation. But even through all of this, there's this kind of spattering of care, which is imbibed within those bonds. It's just so different than what we would experience as family connection today. And of course, we're not saying that family, obligatory family connections like the ones in this book don't exist today. It's just very foreign to us in our circumstances. And I think the circumstances of a lot of readers of this book.
Yeah, and kind of touching on those family dynamics, one of the things we did see a lot in this book is just gratuitous amounts of sexual violence, which is something that's so normalized. Maria is a very, very intelligent girl, but for her, there's no possibilities outside of marriage. Just because there is absolutely no woman in her village save Black Malpo, who is kind of the apothecary / witch character in this book, who have, say you a career. They're kind of trapped in their marriage, and they're doing all of this difficult manual labor. They're fixing the roofs, tending to the sheep, taking care of the household, making dye to dye the clothes in, washing all of the clothes. This is the life that a woman is kind of set for. And having a daughter is incredibly unfortunate for a family in this time period, as described by the book, because that means you have to pay a dowry. So daughters are just associated with loss. And so then it is you go to this apothecary in order to help you have a son. Sons are lucky, and it's when they have these sons in the family where her mother completely shifts her attitude to Maria and kind of shifts her attitude from Maria and shifts all of her attention onto her sons. And kind of like, it's just very, very normalized. Like Maria doesn't even feel pain or hurt. She kind of just accepts it because she knows that her mother has been through that too. It's just normal. It's just completely set in society.
Right. And just like how this book does a lot of reflection on the role of women in society at the time, they also do a lot of reflection on like the dynamic between Greek people and Turkish people during this time period. At least in their scenario, right? Like they're a bunch of refugees, and a lot of the reason why Maria is bought is because her ignorance, innocence, youth, all of these things are seen as valuable because she's just like this uneducated person who doesn't really know like Turkish. Specifically, a lot of emphasis is put on her not knowing Turkish. She's somewhat fluent in Tatar, which is like tangential to Turkish, so she's actually able to follow a lot of Turkish conversations throughout the book, but she has to pretend that she doesn't know Turkish because her ignorance is seen as something to be valued in this situation. And to me, what that reminded me a lot of was like the idea of the odalisque, like this, like very like innocent, helpless, like you have all of the power within the transaction of the purchase. Like this person who is basically little more than an object. And I think what this book does a really good job of portraying is the difference between how different people perceive Maria, her value to them, like what she'll give, and then also shows like Maria as a person. It humanizes her very well, so we're able to see the thoughts in her head, see her weigh different things, and we're able to see her as more than the value that other people construe her.
Yes, I really love that point. So Sahana was speaking about value, right, and how we assign a person value. I really want to speak a little bit about purity culture in this book and the importance placed on virginity. Mm-hmm. This very much exists in our society today. Mm-hmm. It is in a lot of subcultures where, especially for women, mm-hmm. it is valued that women are virgins, or mm-hmm. it is looked down upon if they engage in sexual activities before marriage. Mm-hmm. In this book, it is almost like kind of multiplied 50 times.
Right.
A woman completely loses all of her value if she is not a virgin mm-hmm. at marriage. If to the point where a father would kill his own daughters when they're running away if they're a little bit slower, because he knows that they're going to be caught by other men and raped, essentially.
And part of it is for the fear of the sexual assault, but a lot of it is also associated to the fact that a person's daughters getting sexually assaulted would mean that the father of those daughters loses his honor.
That is the primary reason why these people didn't want their daughters to be sexually, to be a victim of sexual violence. And kind of, it is insane how much that is normalized, because throughout the village, Maria has to cover herself before going out. Even in the refugee camp, the barracks that she's staying in, she cannot show her face. She's a beautiful girl. Mm-hmm. She cannot show her face because out of kind of this fear of being a victim of sexual violence in the camp.
Right.
And it is not seen, again, this is a value that's in modern society when we talk about the culture around surrounding victims of sexual assault and violence, where the blame is placed on the victim rather than the perpetrator, where it's like, you are responsible for taking care of yourself, you need to cover up, you need to do better to prevent this from happening. Men will be men will, in this case men, but the perpetrator will be the perpetrator. They cannot control their natural urges. Those things just rise up. It's your responsibility to deal with it. So it's interesting how you see these kind of like modern values, these archaic values pervade into modern society. And even the end of the book, where we think like, Maria, she kind of is sold to this older man. And at the end, one of the doctors of this man comes and tests to see if she's a virgin, right? At the end of the book, that's where her value to the outside world lies. it literally finishes off with saying, yes, she's a virgin, right? That is where she gets her value from. So throughout the book, throughout this, like the content of this book, we see Maria as a person. Yet that ending, finishing line strips that all away from her and redefines her as, hey, you're a virgin. That's what you are.
All right. Actually, I had a slightly different interpretation of the book, and I really do think that's an interesting take. But I thought the ending line was actually kind of subversive in the sense that I think that connecting back to what I was saying about her not knowing any languages, her not being educated or intelligent in any way, that in some ways is meant to construe like mental virginity. Like if you take physical virginity as like a lack of sexual knowledge, her lack of knowledge in languages would be sort of like ignorance, which is seen as like mental virginity. Sorry if this doesn't make as much sense as I would like it to, but I think that when we follow Maria throughout this book, we see her encounter so many different forms of violence, of struggle. She is like on survival mode for most of this book, and she's really experiencing this wealth of circumstances in which she can only rely on herself in the end. So she is very like intelligent and like mentally experienced, let's say, right? So to me, when the last line of the book, like, she's a genuine virgin, when that shows up, what I construe it as is like all of these people around her, they can see her as like a virgin, they can see her as ignorant, they can see her as just innocent and unknowing of the world and circumstances around her, but she's actually a lot more cognizant of these things than they give her credit for. And one of the other things I just like to touch on really fast is when reading Constantine's interview with Esther Allen concerning this book, something he wrote about was how he felt like, even though this book is only based on his family history, when his father read the book, his father told him, this book is like really accurate. It really portrays like the spirit of what our family went through. And I feel like that really shows, like this is such a interesting historical reflection. It has so many nuances related to social situation and historical situation. And this is something that you don't normally hear about. The only other book that immediately comes to mind from around this time period for me is like Zorba the Greek. You don't really see much about this time period or this place or the happenings of this time. So like being able to read this book was like a very enlightening experience.
Yeah, it makes me wonder like how many other stories like hers are missing or that we don't have. And I think that Peter Constantine did such a wonderful job of like bringing this to light and kind of exposing us to this knowledge and the fact that this human experience exists. Mm-hmm. And I'm so grateful that I got to experience this, kind of tying back to the original point, mm-hmm. which is at the end of this book, we're almost relieved when Maria gets sold. And she seems relieved too, like honestly, this poor mm-hmm. girl, right? She meets this the man that purchased her, and he describes him as maybe he's friendly, you know, his smile seems friendly. And to the reader, we're like, okay, like finally, she's like, maybe she's safe. Maybe she has a home, mm-hmm. some resources, some food, some basic materials mm-hmm. and access to that. And so then it kind of thrusts you into the mentality of like, this is normal, which mm-hmm. is like the mentality that Maria has. This is normal. And so then, but then when you finish the book and you put it down, you're like, this is absolutely not normal. And you feel so guilty for even thinking for a second that this girl, this teenage girl being mm-hmm. sold to a 60-year-old man is completely justified, right? And that kind of remorse that it leaves you with, mm-hmm. I think that's a very interesting feeling. That's mm-hmm. not something that a lot of books leave you with. I think that he does such a wonderful job of like building this world that truly existed. And your quote about how true it is to the actual situation makes me wonder how much research went into this when he was writing.
Right. And one last thing I'd like to touch on is just that one thing that my history teacher this year always used to say to me was that when we're looking at history as these broad events, when we're looking at these like genocides, these massive events involving hundreds of thousands of people, it's really easy to start seeing history as a list of numbers, as a list of dates, right? Like how many people died, how many people were refugees, everything, you start seeing it like that. And what we have to be really careful to do as historians, readers, just members of the public who are interested in understanding our past so we can better understand our future, is that the people who existed in the past were people. And I really think that what this book does is it shows us not only the purchased bride, but it shows us Maria, the person who was purchased, the person who went through all of those difficulties and came out the other side damaged, but like damaged mentally, but still there, right? So it does a good job of just showing the people as people. It helps you understand history, but doesn't dehumanize history. And I really think that that's one of the greatest strengths of this book and why it really appealed to me.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, if Maria didn't survive, we wouldn't even have this book today. So I encourage everyone watching this video to please check out this book and give it a read. It is truly a unique book, and you won't really get this kind of knowledge from any other source. So please check it out. Do give it a read, and we hope you enjoyed this video.
All
We'll see
right.
you next time. Bye.
Bye.